Welcome to Open Minds. In the studio we have Ed and Marc as usual, and we have our guest Donna. Welcome Donna, welcome guys. Today we're in a conversation here today on the subject of ghosts and apparitions. Has anybody had a personal experience of seeing a ghost or an apparition?
Yes, I have, and it was actually only in March of this year.
Really? Tell us about that briefly.
Yeah, I was in a paranormal investigation in some tunnels in Leicestershire, and it was the nearest I've ever come to seeing what people call a manifestation of spirit. I've never actually physically seen anything that I could have described as a ghost prior to this, and the tunnels have a very varied history. It was once an underground Rolls-Royce factory and Vauxhall factory during the Second World War, American military, and was once a nuclear bunker. So it's really interesting from a historical perspective to be in there. And basically we were walking out of the tunnels, we were the last team. I distinctly heard what I thought were footsteps behind me. And we've been taught that if we ever encounter anything that we can't explain like that, to take the camera out and start shooting some pictures. I felt distinctly like there was something or somebody behind me, and I took a series of photographs, and there appeared to be a large mist in the tunnel. I actually seen movement from a peripheral vision, but didn't actually physically see the form and shape that appeared on the camera, and it's the nearest I can say that I've ever come to seeing what's traditionally perceived as a ghost or a spirit, and the photographs have been examined, and we weren't.
You haven't got them with you today.
No, but I could have bought them.
Marc always likes to see the evidence.
Yeah, you haven't actually.
Where's the evidence?
No, you actually haven't seen them. And then, you know, before I would be quite honest and say if I had seen a ghost or I hadn't seen a ghost, I haven't actually physically seen anything up until then that I could describe remotely as the traditional form that we are given.
But you're a paranormal investigator?
Yeah, and I've been since 2005, and it's took all that time for me to actually physically experience
It's
that.
a lot of patience.
It's a lot of patience, and then afterwards they gave the reveal on the tunnels. We're never given any information, and hopefully nobody Googles the information prior to going in. But we then discovered that the recorded phenomena from the people who'd worked in the tunnels was of a very effervescent type luminous mist that basically followed them around. So that was quite interesting.
We'll come back to that in a moment. Have you ever seen a ghost, Ed?
You know, personally, I've never seen one. As a child, though, I lived in a large old house with a large family, and many of my siblings and certainly my mum and dad reported ghost presences. I think as a child I was very frightened in that house. It was a lovely house, but I was quite frightened at night. Big old bedrooms and, you know, under the bedclothes stuff, because I would hear things and I would feel things, but I never actually saw anything. But they did. So if you like, I can tell you what they saw. The most prominent one to me was my dad was becoming quite ill, and he used to sit downstairs a lot, and my mum saw something upstairs, and she came down and he said to her, "You've seen her, haven't you?" And my mum said, being what she was, oh no, what do you mean? What do you mean? No, you've seen her, I can tell you've seen her. And she said, well, what? And he says, the girl. And she said, yes. Did you know about it? And he said, yeah, I've seen her lots of times. So there was a little girl who would float across the landing. We had a big square landing. And this little girl would float across the landing through one wall and through another wall. But this particular time, my mum reported that she'd stopped. She spoke, my mum, being unafraid of these things, just said, it's okay. And the little girl stopped.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Ed, briefly, any experience?
Unfortunately, no, nothing that I can remember, or, you know, as a child or anything like that. No.
I just kind of wonder, you know, just listening to you, neither of you said whether, because I would describe you both as being quite rational kind of people, rationalists in some ways, you know. Like I said, Marc, you know, you always want the evidence.
Yeah.
Whether that actually, whether there's a sense in which that can prevent us from encounter. Don't know, what do you think, Donna?
I think from some of the people that I've actually met, and I admire Marc and his opinion very much, although we do have some really good, interesting debates. But I think scepticism can hinder somebody's ability to open up to any area of research or phenomena or anything like that. Because, I mean, particularly today, we have a group of skeptics who call themselves the guerrilla skeptics.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you mention the word guerrilla, it almost appears that you're at war with the community. I think most people have healthy skepticism, and I am still quite sceptical on certain subjects within the paranormal world. But I think personal experience validates belief sometimes. So if you cannot explain a personal experience by scientific or rational means, where do you go to find out what just happened to you?
I think the unfortunate thing is, though, with a lot of stories, well, most stories, they're all anecdotal. You know, you're talking about your mum and dad's experience, you know, I mean, yes, you're talking about first-hand, you know, kind of experience, but these experiences tend to be anecdotal, and it's very, very, very difficult, obviously to reproduce, to record, to kind of get something tangible that you can then present to the larger community to say, look what's happened, look at this person, look at this apparition. So it still kind of remains in the you know, the dark recesses of anecdotal tales that have been passed down from, you know, kind of one family member to another family member.
I agree. It's very belief based, isn't it? It's very hard to actually put some science around it. That whole subject. You know, if people have witnessed what they say they've witnessed, then as far as they're concerned, it's truth. But it's for them.
Okay. Now, given that people have ghostly experiences, we'd all accept this, that, you know, that they're regularly reported, people seeing ghosts, sensing presences, and so on. What do we think they are?
I think the subject matter is so vast, as you know, people don't realise. Actually, there is a lot of research, scientific research. The problem that we have is that we are limited with. There's only 80 parapsychologists in the world who are actually actively researching any sort of paranormal subject. Most scientists that I've met have great difficulty in branching out into this area of research due to the fact that their peers tend to come down on them, you know, and berate them, and they become a laughing stock. I mean, some of our greatest scientists, you know, Sir William Crookes, for example, when he became involved with spiritualism, it practically destroyed his whole career and his life. So I think it's very difficult for a man of science. There are a number of academics who are researching it, but it does, Marc is right in what he says. The majority of stuff that we come across is anecdotal, but because the technology has advanced so much, people are now capturing more and more phenomena.
What are they? Or what various explanations are there?
There are various explanations for ghosts and spirits, and one of them is the stone tape theory, which is a theory that buildings and land can absorb energy and trauma. I think the theory started in the 70s, and it was an archaeologist, his name escapes me, who then became a parapsychologist, and he indicated that, in his opinion, with some of the research that he'd done, things that we take for granted, like you know, magnetic force, natural magnetic force from the earth and stuff like that, tend to enhance phenomena, and these areas act almost like a tape recording. Hence, there's a very famous one where a guy who, I think it was York somewhere, where he was in the cellar of one of the churches, and a Roman legion basically walked through the wall, the very famous one. And it's quite interesting, that story, because when they researched it, he said that they came in from just above the knee. He couldn't see anything else just above the knee. And it was unknown to him that he was actually kneeling down on a Roman road that was 3 feet under the ground. And they're the type of hauntings that people would equate to. It's never been proven.
So like a tape?
Basically, they're saying any history can be replayed over and over again because buildings and the ground absorb
So it's
energy.
almost like,
replay of-
I was going to say like a time slip where something is, like you say, being replayed, but it may be 200-300 years
later
in the past and it's being replayed, or maybe this time and another time, because they say that time is not necessarily linear, is it? It's more like possibly
It's
more
not
like
fixed.
It's not fixed. It may be more like a block. So kind of time from say 200 years or 300 years ago comes very, very close to the current time that we're experiencing, or maybe even overlaps. So we experience something from the Roman era now, but really it's just two times coming, kind of close together.
And they class those as
So it's
traditional.
not necessarily the dead coming back to visit.
They class those, what you're talking about, what we've just been discussing, as traditional hauntings, when the grey lady is seen at 11 p.m. coming down the stairs. So they differentiate the difference between a haunting and then when Ed has been talking about his mum and the fact that the vision, the manifestation, the little girl actually interacted with your mum and stopped, that would be classed slightly differently. That would be classed more as a spirit interaction. This is where the difference between spirit and ghost play.
We're gonna take a break now. We're going to our commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up on this a bit more. Talk about the evidence and carry on. So join us after the break, where on Open Minds we're talking about ghosts and apparitions and all such things. Welcome back to Open Minds. We're in the studio now with Ed and Marc and Donna, our guest, who's a paranormal investigator. We're talking about ghosts, ghost stories, hauntings, that kind of thing. We were talking before the break about traditional hauntings, recordings, as they're called. What I would call probably colliding time frames. I just want to give Ed the opportunity to pick up on that. You were saying something.
Well, like I mentioned in the break, I think I have an off-the-wall view of the colliding time frame thing. I'm a great believer in time being something subordinate to the event, that the event is the main thing and time is attached to it by us in some way, because time is important for us to sort of progress our own understanding of the world, isn't it? But if you were the Roman legion walking through that place and you were observed by us now, did they observe us at the time they were marching through? In other words, did they ever report something that they didn't know was past or future, but they saw some things that were odd around them? Are there any recordings?
Does it work
literature?
the other way?
Does it work the other way? Are there any historical records that show that these people saw some sightings?
Well, that's always saying that
were odd.
We are looking at something that has actually already happened. The Roman legion walking through the wall or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas the future, as far as they were concerned, has not yet happened, so therefore could not be possibly captured.
Yeah, but I'm using your premise, which is the time thing is not really that important, and the events are more important. So if the time is just two events overlapping at a moment, then it would work both ways. So
that's
not
fascinating.
necessarily.
I don't want to get back on. It was a previous episode when we looked at aliens, but we get cave drawings, don't you? Of being, maybe these were ancient people who are seeing something in the future as a kind of haunting. That was
so like a haunting in reverse.
In reverse.
But I'm sure that people around the world, or somebody, will have thought about this and written about the sightings of the likes of the Roman legion, of what appeared to be future things, the cave things or whatever it might be. So I'd be really interested to find out if there were any such recordings that showed, we saw people who were standing 3 foot above the ground in a strange place, wearing strange clothes, and they had strange implements.
Could it work in as much as if there was an event that was so cataclysmic that, as well as sending ripples forward into the future so that people will always remember that cataclysmic event, like ripples when you throw a rock into a pool, those ripples will go forward and will go backwards. So could it be also that this cataclysmic event is sending ripples back through time so people are remembering the future? I don't know.
Well, I mean, Back to the Future.
Yeah. I mean, from the Roman centurion guy, I was reading a bit about the episode, and he said there was no interaction whatsoever. They just came through the wall and then vanished. And that's traditional haunting, as I say, is like the Grey Lady of the Lake. And you usually find with those type of hauntings that there has been a cataclysmic event or a traumatic death, or, for instance, Gettysburg Battlefield, which I visited last year.
And Mons.
Mons, places like
Culloden.
these. Yeah, they're all historical battles. And traditionally, there are a lot of reported hauntings, sightings of it's very difficult, obviously, in Gettysburg and places like that where they have, reenactments of battles and stuff. But there have been some really interesting reports of gunshot battles, soldiers walking through fields and those type of things by people witnesses who are very reputable, police officers, guys in the army. And in fact, there's a number of books written about haunted airfields in the UK where bomber crews are often seen, and it's a really fascinating book actually, because a lot of the people who've reported those incidents are very well respected.
Okay, we talked about these traditional hauntings, what you're calling traditional hauntings, ghosts walking through walls, elevated and so on.
Yeah.
I just want to pick up now on what are called in the public discourse poltergeists.
Okay.
So we can understand perhaps why ghosts can walk through walls according to that theory.
Yeah.
But what about ghosts that move things, slam doors, leave smells behind? How do we explain that?
The typical explanation for poltergeist haunting traditionally centres around a teenager, someone of puberty age, and having experienced poltergeist activity as a teenager, and it was in various forms, and one of them was that every time I would go to bed, my guitar would start playing by itself on the top of the wardrobe. And those, it wasn't a violent poltergeist. There was no violence to person or anything like that. But there was definite, my parents witnessed it, and my mum's probably one of the most rational people that I've ever met. And a lot of that tends to centre around people, again, who are going through traumatic episodes in life. The body is changing from a child to an adult. And obviously the most famous one is the Enfield Poltergeist, which was just on the television. And I think a lot of the theory is that in some way, the energy produced or the energy surrounding those type of people becomes enhanced, and it's actually not ghostly, although there are reports of spirits communicating and stuff. But a lot of it, in my belief, is to do with energy. It's to do with energy produced.
Ed, you're the rationalist.
Yeah, the thing about the energy thing, I mean, I'm an engineer from long ago. And so I like to think about the engineering of these things. So we talk about energy, and energy is responsible for everything that we see. But I don't understand why we don't have a physics of what you just described. Energy is everything. So why don't we have a physics that says why that happens? Why a teenager can give off an energy that will then remotely manipulate something? And playing the guitar sounds a bit more clever than throwing a stone or a vase onto the floor. It requires something to do that. Well, why don't we have that documented?
We do, but we don't have it documented
By a scientist?
Oh no, it's documented, but not via poltergeist activity. Human minds, the very famous Russian lady, and there's lots of video of her that the Russians and the Americans, she could manipulate things and make them move with her mind. The theory is that a teenager is doing that unconsciously.
That's telekinesis.
Yeah, I think it's almost like that.
When you're talking about a teenager, you're talking about a teenager who's died? Or one that's
No, I think it's
still,
one that's still alive, isn't it?
Most poltergeist hauntings are around teenagers, which is like the Enfield.
Ah, right, okay, yeah.
So what I'm saying is, this particular lady, the Russian lady, and there's lots of documentation that the military and scientists all around the world, they know that people can bend metal with the minds and stuff like that. But there's video of this lady in the 50s actually concentrating on a bowl with a load of scientists around her and moving things around inside the bowl. She's doing that consciously. The theory is that when poltergeist activity happens, it's unconsciously happening. That energy is not sort of contained. It's bouncing off the wall, should we say.
Films have been made, haven't they, about those things?
Yeah.
What was that famous one, the young girl who...
Carrie.
Yeah.
That's a famous one, isn't it? Where she just lost it and everything goes to pot.
Yeah.
So, Marc, what's your take on this?
It's interesting, actually, because when you said about teenagers, I'm going to confess, I did have a strange experience once as probably a 12, 13-year-old. I used to have piano lessons, and my mum used to make me every single day do half an hour on the piano. And I can remember, playing the piano, and the kitchen was next door, and my mum was in the kitchen, and I just heard this loud bang on the wall, and on the top of the piano was this pot cat, which flew off, just off the piano and just bounced onto the carpet.
You weren't playing the piano really hard?
No. I mean, I was just tinkering on the piano. And I remember going into the kitchen saying to my mum, "What are you doing?" And she was at the sink near the window, nowhere near, if you like, that inside wall. I've never really thought much about it, but we were asking earlier, have I had any experiences of ghosts? I suppose that is probably the strangest thing, that this crack on the wall and this pot cat, which wasn't actually touching the wall, it was on the top of the piano, flew off the piano. So I suppose what you're saying about teenagers and energy, possible.
Yeah, I mean,
possible.
There's
truth in
no,
that.
from what I can gather, there is no categoric scientific proof that this is exactly what happens. But it seems to be that it's atypically teenagers. It's around that age group. Although some people do say that they go into houses and that they've moved to a new home and the taps turn on by themselves and those type of things. And having investigated those type of phenomena in the past, you quite often find that, the theory is that, an elderly gentleman's died in his house, someone new moves in, he doesn't like where they've put the kettle, he doesn't like where they've done this. That's also reported poltergeist phenomena.
Yeah. I mean, I'm as our viewers will know, I'm a clergyman, and I remember when I was a curate in my training position, but having going into houses, which are actually quite modern houses, where people had moved in, and a smell had been left in the house.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to stop now because we're now going to our commercial break, and we'll pick up on that when we come back from the break, when we discuss ghosts and apparitions further. Join us after the break. Welcome back to Open Minds. We're in the studio with Marc and Ed, who from the Open Minds group, and Donna, who is our guest, paranormal investigator. We're talking about ghosts and apparitions. And before the break, the commercial break, I was talking about atmospheres and about how when I was a trainee minister on a housing estate, I was invited to go into various houses, which were fairly newly built houses, post sort of 60s houses, which had smells or atmospheres that people, they'd moved into the house that connected somehow with the previous occupant who may have died. And, even after cleansing the house in some way, physically, these remained. How do we explain that?
The theory is, again, it's almost like the stone tape theory. apart from the fact that there's conscious interaction. There seems to be some form of conscious interaction from the previous occupant of the house. Or the other theory is that the land, that it's particularly like you said, new buildings, you wouldn't expect a brand new house that you've just bought or purchased to go in there and have poltergeist activity. But a lot of the time it can depend on what actually the property is built on. And in some cases where there's been en masse poltergeist activity in new properties, they've discovered that there's an area of natural geophysical stress around that area, or again a traumatic imprint, you know. But traditionally, like what you've just explained to me, is the theory is, you know, the imprint, the consciousness of that person who that house has been is still there. We can't see it, we can't feel it. They're interacting more with us than we're interacting with them. And cases, you know, I don't like that carpet. I don't like where you've put they're the traditional type of things that people will say.
Yeah.
Every time I put the kettle there, it's moved over there. I come in and the taps are off and stuff like that, or the door slams. And when an investigating team goes in and they do some recording that, quite often they will get evidence that would indicate that it's a previous occupant of the house, but there is a conscious interaction.
I have a couple of friends who live not far from here who reported they moved into this house from another place down south, and within a week or two they were reporting that the rug they put on the middle of the floor was moving itself every night.
Yeah.
It would move a good distance. They put heavy objects on it so it wouldn't move, and it would move again.
Yeah.
They had to change its orientation and all kinds of stuff. It took weeks.
I want to change tack a bit now, because I want to come to the whole area of the fascination with ghosts in the public imagination. That, you know, ghost stories and films and that whole genre, it doesn't come and go, does it? It's always kind of there, and those books are always for sale, and they always sell well, and the films, people love the films.
Culture.
It's part of our culture. You know, how do we explain that? What is that?
I think it's our culture to tell tales and to pass those tales on, and I think we like the idea of being frightened. We frighten each other with.
Sort of frightened, but not too frightened.
No, not too frightened, no. But we do like to kind of tell tales that will make us feel a little uneasy going to bed at night, you know. And I think that has been passed down throughout the generations. You know, I've heard these tales of the white lady walking across the lake.
I can remember the Penguin Book of Ghosts. Can you know, as a kid? There was like a series, you know,
Yeah. I think historically, way before our time, these events and these issues of phenomena appearing were consistently reported by historians of that particular
So they
time.
were passed down orally?
Orally, or people were talking in like the 16th century, 17th century about seeing spectres, figures. Gargoyles were put onto churches to frighten away evil spirits and all
they were there in
things.
Shakespeare as well.
Yeah,
weren't they?
of course, yeah.
But also, you know, if you go back to way beyond where there was no artificial light and people would just go to bed and when it went dark and get up in the morning, and nighttime was the time for everyone to be together and huddle together in the caves or whatever they lived in, and stay close, because that's when nasty things would happen at night. So I think it's kind of passed down in our genes from way back that we should be, first of all, fearful of the dark more than the light, and therefore, when we're fearful, we become more stressed, don't we? If we think we're fearful of something, we'll become more stressed. We're more
vigilant as well, aren't we?
Absolutely.
You know, is it that
So
we're warning
we're
each
watching,
other about the darkness?
Yeah, and we're teaching our little ones to think like that too. And then when we exaggerate it, like you're saying, we would tease our brothers and sisters, if you know what I mean by that, and hide under the bed and, you know, make a noise in the night and frighten the life out of them and get told off by mum and dad for those things. And we kind of build a culture of fear, of the unknown, the unseen, the little noises, the dark. And
because we're vulnerable in the dark.
Because as children as well, we're quite. We can be manipulated easily. We're still learning everything, aren't we? You know, we don't get born with these things, do we? We learn them. And I think as adults then, you know, I know some adults who are still afraid of going to bed on their own and in the dark and noises. Leave the door open, leave a light on.
I have to confess.
Yeah, leave
light in the corridor.
Yeah, leave a light on and things like that.
Natural curiosity about things that cannot be explained.
Yeah.
You know, we always look for an explanation, a rational, scientific explanation, particularly today. And those things that science can't give us any answers for, we always find that we're really intrigued about.
But is there a point that we possibly don't even want science to explain these things? I think we, as a culture, we want to have things that are unexplained. So if somebody comes forward and says, well, this is X, Y, and Z, and there's nothing strange about it at all, we dismiss it.
Doing today.
Yeah. We kind of dismiss it.
You're
And we think,
spoiling it
no, we
for us,
don't.
Donna,
We don't
you know.
want an explanation. we want something that is still a little bit mysterious and unknown. And I think that that's part of our culture.
And what about the role of imagination? Because I remember as a child, when the lights went off, and I lived in the country, so there were no lights outside. My imagination went wild.
Yeah.
Now I'm probably quite an imaginative person, but is that in relationship with imagination with this stuff?
I think we can all use our imagination to great effect, and anxiety and panic will often trigger off some really crazy thoughts, and
physical reaction.
Or
as well.
physical reaction,
Yes.
and then of course there is the fact that we were once hunted, and we weren't just the hunters. So is there some sort of sense that we have, like they call the sixth sense, that we've all had that episode where we've been standing in the queue in the supermarket, and we feel like we're being stared at, and we turn round, and we just don't feel quite comfortable with that person being so close to us. Is it that we are sensing and sensing things unseen, that type of thing? There is some indication that some of the things that happen to us when we get frightened and we get scared are actually physical reactions.
There is research. I'm sorry interrupting there. There's a guy called Rupert Sheldrake.
Yes.
Has actually, I don't know what the results of the research are, but he has done this research around the sense of being stared at from behind, where he's had, I think, groups of people, and saying stare at them or not stare at them, and then the people have got to say whether or not they felt they were being stared at or not. I don't know what the results are.
And I'd also, if you look at schizophrenia as something which is supposed to be an illness, I just wonder whether they're like the animals who we talked about earlier, where they have a hypersensitivity to things. So they're like the rest of us, that they're fearful of these things, these unknown, uncertain things, the dark and whatever. They're just like us in that respect. But they're sensing much more than we are. So their fear is really exaggerated.
Okay, I want to come to that because you just mentioned that. That was something we talked about in the commercial break. Because for our viewers' sake, we carry on talking through these breaks, and but we were talking about animals picking up on sensing atmospheres, even seeing things, perhaps.
Yeah.
Do you want to just, Donna, tell us what you were saying about that?
I have a series of photographs that I call the cat detective photographs, because I was unaware visually that there was anything going on, but I had two cats at that time, and they both lived outdoors in a little wooden house because I developed an allergy to them. And I came in one evening quite late and had forgotten to feed them, so I went into the house, bent down, was feeding them. I physically felt what felt like wind flick my hair up like this, and as you do, you look up, and I couldn't see a thing. And then when I looked down, my two cats were fluffed up like big balls, backing away from
and they're not
something.
fluffy cats.
No, you know the way that when they get sort of startled. So they were backing away, and they could see something that I couldn't see. And the investigative researcher in me thought, right, where's the camera? So I walked back into the house, got the camera, came back, and the pair of the cats were like just staring up. Beautiful clear sky. And I took a series of photographs, and there was, let's just say, something very, very unusual in those photographs. And I don't know what it is. It's like a misty form that's undulating and morpheus.
I wish you bought these photographs.
I have got them.
Marc is wishing that.
You've seen some of them.
Do you have them? Could we publish them somewhere?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
You can have
Let's
access
do
to
that.
all of them.
Yeah.
There's some really cool photographs there. But the energy thing, the one story that I want to sort of tell you guys about sensing energy and not knowing where it's coming from, or sensing something, is I was on holiday in Wales, and my friend's partner was a photographer, and he'd spotted this ledge overlooking a lake, farmer's field and everything, and he pulls the car up, and there's four of us in the car, myself, my partner, her and her partner, who's the photographer. And us three get out, and I says to my partner, you get out of the car, and he says, no. And I says, what do you mean, no? He says, no, I don't like it. He's got no interest in this subject matter whatsoever. And I said to him, Marc, what do you mean you don't like it? He said, I really don't like it. So anyway, we got off, went over, took the photographs. And when we were overlooking the ledge, I really felt a sense of fear, sadness, and it was so intense. And then all three of us went back to the car, spoke about it, went back home and researched the area, and in actual fact we were standing looking over the site of where an Aer Lingus aircraft had crashed in 1952 that I knew nothing about, all hands lost. And my partner, when I went back to speak to him, he was the one who said there's something really not right happened here.
Well, when we're going to come back from the break, because we're going to another break, it's so quick, these sections, they seem to get quicker. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about, you know, the relationship between ghosts and spirits and how perhaps we get rid of things we don't want. Join us after the break. Welcome back to Open Minds. We're in the studio, Ed and Marc and Donna. We're talking about ghosts and apparitions and all things related to that. I mentioned earlier when I was a trainee minister, I was invited to go to houses where there have been hauntings and atmospheres. And as part of that role, I was expected really to do something about it. And I really didn't know what I was doing. And we do have in the Church of England diocesan exorcists, and I wasn't one of those. But somebody told me, you know, that you can try a Eucharist, a service of Holy Communion, and that normally does the trick. Now, I did do that in lots of places, in actually most places, when I performed that ritual, it did actually work. So have you got either a rational or a paranormal explanation for that? I mean, obviously I've got my own
Is that a
beliefs.
placebo effect, perhaps? That you know, I'm just thinking, just came into my mind the fact that you'd been in.
Yeah.
Is it placebo or isn't it? Because basically the power of prayer, absent healing, those type of things. There are some scientists working on absent healing, clearing of houses.
Absent healing, what does that mean?
Absent healing is, for instance, my sister fell ill in America.
Yeah.
I've got friends who are into Reiki, who are into spiritual healing, who are like yourself, clergy, who all, I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to do what I do in my faith, I'm going to send all that love.
So it's like a remote thing.
It's, remote stuff. So absent healing is when we would send our best thoughts, our best wishes to somebody. And then you've got all the shamanic type of clearing houses with white sage and saying prayers and leaving spells.
So different cultures around the world.
Different cultures around the world do different things to clear houses, and you know. But for me personally, I think the belief system of the person whose house it is also helps, because if you have strong faith, but then you'll often get cases of hauntings where some people have no faith, and it still occurs in their house, and it still works. And the most interesting experiment I've ever done with the power of prayer and clearing and stuff was they say that high levels of electromagnetic frequency, EMF energy, is often present when there's a haunting or poltergeist activity. And there was one occasion when we were investigating in Derby, which is again known supposedly as the most haunted town in the UK, where we have some equipment that measures electricity and those type of frequencies, two different types. And literally it was through the roof readings that we'd never seen before in the city centre, which is where a lot of the hauntings occur. But then we crossed over and went into the church and there was no readings at all. And it was so stunning to us. We couldn't believe this has actually happened. I would walk over the threshold, the readings would stop in the threshold. You know, it was absolutely amazing. So we decided, is this something to do with faith? Is it something to do with prayer? So we went to the spiritualist church and exactly the same things happen. So sometimes the thing is, you know, you get a lot of people who equate negative things to poltergeist activity when it actually can be, in some cases, natural physical phenomena.
Okay.
You know, but I personally do believe that when a clergyman goes into a house, the thought process that goes into it, the faith, the love, the care has some form
you
of
were saying
effect.
this, pick up on this placebo thing.
Yeah. Well, there were two things in my head there.
Yeah.
If I can come back to the other one in a minute.
Yeah.
But the placebo thing, I think that, if, like you say, if the person to whom it's being done, in other words, who's had the problem and it's being cleared for them, I think, if they believe that it's being fixed, then it could have been them in the first place that was creating it. Now, and if, as you say, you heard of someone who has no faith.
Yeah.
However, if during the proceedings, this person who has no faith that the proceeding is going to work anyway, during that proceeding, something happens differently for them that was just coincidental, like a noise stopped in their ears that would normally be happening, and it just stopped for some other reason, nothing to do with anything that was present. Their belief system could instantly change that, oh, maybe it is working. And without even knowing it, they've changed their belief system enough to change the whole thing. So the placebo effect for them is working, but they would still never admit that they believed it. But we don't know that instantaneously something changed their belief system unknown to themselves. So we'll never know the answer to that sort of question, will
Because people are uncomfortable with this stuff. I mean, we're sat here in the studio talking about it, but when we've discussed on camera and also off camera, when we have had these kind of experiences ourselves, sometimes it makes us very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Donna, you're because you're out looking for it, you're less uncomfortable by it, but it is uncomfortable, and people do want to get rid of it if it's in their house, don't they?
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
There was a case of a friend of mine. She had moved into her grandparents' house. Now, this was her grandparents' house. At this particular time, she had no interest in the paranormal, no interest in ghosts or anything of that matter. She was simply getting on with her life and getting on with work and everything. And there were various incidents within the property that made her feel very uncomfortable at that time.
and people can know about histories as well of properties.
Of course. And it's her grandparents' house and everything. And her rationale was, why would my grandparents, why would my ancestors do any of this type of scary stuff to me? And then over a long course of time, she had a clergyman in. Things went really well because this clergyman was really quite unique in that he worked with a spiritualist as well. So he was a Church of England, but he actually worked with a spiritualist medium. And the medium had said, this is your family, this is your grandparents, and there must be something going on with you at the moment because they have, they're trying to get your attention and it's frightening you, blah, blah, blah. And what my friend hadn't explained was she'd just gone through a very painful divorce. So emotionally,
right. So there's
and
other energies there.
There's other energies there, you see.
Okay.
So
I just want to pick up, because we're in the last 5 minutes of this, because it's been a great show, and I hope our viewers think that as well. But Marc, I just want to pick up on the difference between ghosts and spirits, and I'm not going to come to Donna because she's the expert on this. I'm going to ask Marc just to give you a bit of a chance to.
Wow. I mean, I would say if pinned up against a wall to give an answer. I always get the sense that a ghost is a dead person manifesting somewhere, walking through the walls, that type of thing. Whereas spirit, for me, is something that we all have. We all have a spirit. So I don't know whether or not the spirit is the thing that lives on or goes on into perhaps another incarnation, whereas a ghost seems like a fixed entity that's possibly repeating certain actions.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, to me, a ghost is of the form, although it may be wispy or whatever, but of the form that people would recall, that it resembles a living person from let's say, the past. So a ghost is one of those. An out-of-place person from some other time. Whereas I think a spirit, like you say, I think spirits appear to me to be in us all. We're spiritual individuals. We're made of spirit. And spirits can therefore, an energy form which doesn't have any resemblance to past, present, future people, It's just something that has an energy or maybe a power with that energy to manipulate things. Telekinesis might come from just spirit. Consciousness, like consciousness, absolutely.
Between
So
spirit and
yeah,
that's what we traditionally would say was the difference. There is a conscious form of communication between the spirit and the person who's
what I think there's a
experiencing
connection is that the ghost would have had a spirit.
Yeah.
And I think if we're trying to, let's say we're believing that we can manipulate ghosts out of the way and hauntings, then we should use our spirits to communicate with the spirit of the ghost.
Yeah.
And ease things in that way, use the energies that we both share in common, the living and the dead, to manipulate that.
It's a form
Does
of
this sound like I
communication.
believe this stuff?
It sounds
hard
like you're,
not to.
It sounds like you're
Just open to
being
it.
open to
Yeah.
an explanation for it.
Yeah,
Which is the most
absolutely open,
important
which
thing.
is the only way to do this.
Yeah.
We can't talk about this if we're closed one way or the other.
Yeah, and you have to have a fine balance of it. I have seen people in the past who become totally obsessed with everything paranormal and that. So you have to always keep yourself in check. But you are right, the more open you are to exploration, the more you learn. And some of it, like with politics, you don't agree with. And some of it you do. So, and if you've experienced something personally, it's far more powerful, I think. And then if it's recorded and backs up the personal experience, then it becomes really powerful.
Well, I mean, that is a really good note to end on. This has been a fantastic programme. Donna, thanks so much for coming in today and talking about this subject. Open Minds is open to suggestions. If you want to contact us on openminds@baytvliverpool.com, and we'll see you next time.